Morning, everyone who's just joining. I see the participant numbers are coming up quickly. Hi, everybody. I'm Nikki Zawadsky from the BCH Aboriginal Health Program here. I am just joining today with our guest, Professor Jeffrey McNeil-Seymour, and our lovely ASL interpreters, Jillian and Seraphine. Just going to give a couple moments as people are joining the room, but I'd like to start by sharing my slides. Here we are. So yeah, welcome everyone. I see folks are joining. So we're here today for another session of our Pesca Picks. And today, again, as I mentioned, our guest is Professor Jeffrey McNeil-Seymour. And I want to just take us through the session today a little bit. And so let's see how we'll start here today with an acknowledgement of the lands. Those of us from the BCH Aboriginal Health Team are zooming in today from the unceded, ancestral, and occupied homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. BCH region, it covers 14 different nations as well as, 16 different nations as well as 2 Métis charter communities. And this is just a picture of our territory. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. I am a first-generation white settler. My people are Polish and French, and I'm very grateful to be with you today from the gorgeous territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And as I mentioned, I'm here with Professor Jeffrey McNeil-Seymour. Jeffrey is a two-spirit to Kamloops and fourth-generation English settler and is an appointed speaker by and for their Secwepemc Nation. Jeffrey is an assistant professor to Ryerson University School of Social Work, a decolonial methodologist informed by Secwepemc teachings. Jeffrey contributes as an expert witness to Canada's Missing Murdered Indigenous Women inquiry hearings in Iqaluit, Nunavut, to the survivance of Indigenous women, girls, trans, and two-spirit people internationally. Jeffrey inextricably links land and water defense and social work. Jeffrey was honored to be invited and deliver the 2019 keynote address at Montreal's annual Two-Spirit Conference and will be the curator of this year's Queer Art Festival 2021 on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Thank you, Jeffrey. We're also here today with our ASL interpreters, Jillian Pettit. Jillian is Tsimshian from the Kitkatla Nation and grew up on her lands in Prince Rupert and Port Edward. She's zooming in from the Coast Salish land here in Vancouver. And our other interpreter, who's signing right now, our other interpreter who's not signing right now is Seraphine Charlson, is from Hesquit, and she joins us from Katsi, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen and Stolo territory in Surrey, BC. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey now to share his slides and take it away. Thanks, everybody.
My name is Jeffrey McNeil-Seymour. I'm an invited guest here on these unceded territories as I have ancestral relationships that go back since time immemorial. There's strong connections between our Secwepemc people and the nations here. I'm also in service to the hereditary leadership of the nations here, and worked alongside a lot of the people that are also doing a lot of the really important frontline work here, and I get invited to speak here as well. You'll see as we get into my presentation. So I just want to say Kukshjam, Heinshka, Miigwech, OCM for having me here today to share what little I know with you all. So I'm just going to share my screen here of my super fun and fabulous presentation today. So I just want to have fun for the next 40 minutes with y'all. We're going to talk about some serious topics, of course, but at the same time, I also try to put as much heart to make this as accessible. I don't want people to come away feeling bad or anything like that, but I just wanted to also flesh out some important things I feel that we should all be considering. Even in these COVID times, it's hard. I know that what I'm going to be asking of today might seem a little daunting because I'm just really hyper aware of the pressures that the healthcare system is under, especially with COVID and everything. So I just hold my hands up to everyone here and just say, you know, Cook's Jam, and thank you for the work that you are all doing and for hanging in there. I'm navigating the healthcare system myself right now as I'm also fighting cancer. And, you know, just having to hold compassion in terms of my own engagement in some moments of friction that I've had, you know, coming through, but recognizing these things moving forward. So I'm just asking, you know, for that same compassion and empathy as I bring to light some of the pieces that we're going to talk about in the next half hour. Okay, so this slide here, this is from when I was working, I just have this title here, so I thought it was really interesting. As a faculty member going in and representing social work, the faculty representative for the School of Nursing, when I was bringing up a point about basic human rights, said health and wellness do not mean anything in the School of Social Work. And I was like, or sort of School of Nursing. And so I was like, oh, so I'm going to pick on nursing a little bit today. To get us started off in a good way, I just wanted to share some good words from one of our chiefs, Ron Ignace. And this is translated from Secwepemchin. I'm not going to read Secwepemchin, but I just wanted to say that this is my intention moving forward, that today, if we want salmon to always be coming upriver, we have to strive to look after one another and to help one another. Today, that's our power. And if we can't do that, we'll become poor and we will suffer. And so as we were like heading into these unknown times with like biosphere collapse and all that sort of stuff, you know, we have to really look after the environment. And that's really what I'm coming at today, is those intersections of thinking about healthcare as they intersect with the lands and the water, and especially the nations in which we're practicing healthcare in. So moving forward, just a brief little bit about colonialism and settler colonialism, which is like settler colonialism is more of the realm that I am interrogating right now in my own work. Colonialism is the permanent structure of domination, whereas settler colonialism is the establishment of a new entity, and it works to differentiate itself from the colonial metropole. Settler colonialism works to reinvent itself as a new entity in terms that obscure these structures and power relations. So it's really, it can be hard to see or to identify these structures because they are very insidious and moving around. So it's hard to come to recognize these things, or even when we're even participating in them. And so that's also why I'm bringing this up today. So this lecture is a learning opportunity. It's vision from the intersections of Secwepemc law. I've also leaned into the Canadian Nursing Association's Code of Ethics, and that there's a call for our practices to be perpetually self-reflexive. Be mindful of excavation in your check-ins with yourself and with your colleagues or other knowledge keepers around consensual questioning, as Indigenous storytelling of survivance and resiliency can also come at a cost. Centering Secwepemc laws of reciprocity is key. So take only what you need and always give back. Our time together will leave you with questions on purpose. Reconciliation is more easily achievable through Indigenous laws of water protecting and defending for those yet to come, for those coming after us, and for our responsibility here and now to be restoring the lands and the water to the abundance that they once were. My elder, my cat who passed away last year, remembers in her lifetime when she was a little girl that the South Thompson River used to run, you know, used to run red from shore to shore with the returning sockeye salmon. And that year that she said that to us in one of my closing circles for my fourth year social work students, that was the first year that she never got salmon. So a little bit about me, Postcards from the Edge. So I did a fast this past fall as part of my spiritual healing for, this cancer journey that I'm on. And I did my fast in front of the pipeline that's coming through our territory. This is Sehuacankulu. This is our territorial boundary. And as you can see, it comes through our territory the most. And so I did my fast right down at Sehuacametkwa, what's now known as the Thompson River. This is the Kamloops Tesequacum. This is where the two rivers meet, the people from where the two rivers meet. This is just a quick example of our traditional or our ancestral lodgings. I don't like to say traditional because that word traditional gets used against us, especially like in land and water, like negotiation, defense, and like Aboriginal rights. But anyways, so you can see on the inside here. But one thing I just wanted to point out to you here is that if we look around us, and I'm really aware of this now that I'm a visitor here on these Coast Salish territories, that when I look at all of the construction and I look at the homeless issue, I used to live here 10 years ago, and just in the brief 10 years compared to now, I'm blown away. The amount of money that's in this city, I just think about this structure here, and that when you look on the insides here, every single one of those items that you see in there would have been harvested ceremoniously. These things would have been prayed for, they would have been talked to, they would have been, honored in terms of providing this home. And so just think about the vast differences in terms of like how quickly a lot of the buildings go up here, how ceremoniously are these buildings going up, and how well are we looking after one another in those ways. Kamloops is now more of a powwow culture community. That's really what we're known for now. So here's just a quick aerial bird's eye view of what that looks like. So as I said, I'm Kamloopsum. I'm a fourth generation English settler. On the left-hand image here, you can see the Idle No More. That's me being an invited speaker here during the call to action when the violences that were happening out in Micmac territory were, there was a national call of action. So I spoke there. And I always have to give a shout out to my dad, Jeff Seymour. He passed away 5 years ago. He was a residential school survivor who I say didn't survive because 60 years old is a rather young age to die. And that's my mom, Jackie McNeil. She is a nurse and she is a rodeo barrel racing queen. So watch out for her at the next rodeo you go to. This is just a brief little bit of some of the works that I've done. Again, just standing up as a two-spirit person, representing my nation, calling out LGBTQ pride and, the RBC banks and TD banks who fund pipelines, and calling to question, why are we having these parties when we also, are then becoming complicit in the ongoing dispossession of Indigenous people. And there I am with Elizabeth May. I absolutely adore her. I'm all for Indigenous resurgence and survivance and all of these good things, our sovereignty, but I do love me some Elizabeth May. All right, so for those of you that don't know what Two-Spirit is, it captures a baseline or starting point of identity formation, a declaration of complexity of the intersections of gender and sexuality as it is housed inside the Indigenous body. Two-Spirit is an opportunity to define our cultural attachments and assert our gender fabulousness and our sexy First Nation sensational selves as they exist outside of dominant continuums of European and Western and gender and sexuality constructs. So that's just briefly. So now we're going to get into the meat of this presentation. So in the background of this slide, you can see the Kamloops Residential School. This was where my father went, and the men and the women were, the boys and girls. On the far left, that was the boys' dormitorium, and then on the dormitorium closest to us on the right, that was where the girls went. While I was doing my research back home, coming to understand the experiences of Two-Spirit people in Kamloops or in Kamloops, one of the stories that was gifted to me was of a young girl who once she hit puberty, it was discovered that she actually was endowed with a penis. And so her hair was cut and she was put over with the boys. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit to the 94 calls to action by the TRC. And that would be my 95th one, is to help, restore our nations and to confront homophobia and transphobia as they exist in our communities. Because Elizabeth Soyek out of the Faculty of Nursing at UBC has done some really fabulous research and, has confirmed basically what we know in Two-Spirit communities as being our truth. And the truth being is that we're the most at risk of, as Two-Spirit people, we're the most at risk of homelessness, of substance misuse, and ultimately suicide. And so it's just something that we really need to hold close to center and to our hearts, because, we really need to let our Two-Spirit people know that they're loved and that they're wanted in community. So it becomes crucial for us to identify the ways in healthcare has and was been folded into practices of domination by contributing to the mythology of Canada as kind of global leader in diversity and equity, a champion of human rights and that sort of thing. So we really need to come to question that. And the reason why I bring that up is because of the deafening silence that happened when, these things were coming up. So these were a couple of memes that came out last October. There are non-Indigenous people in Nova Scotia petitioning for the revival of residential schools, whereas the other one said that, the residential schools were good for Indigenous people. And this other one here in the center calls for our bodies to literally be used as bait. So when this kind of violence is being perpetuated, absolutely, when I then start to think about, social work code of ethics, or I think about even nursing, and that's why I'm going to pick on nurses today, because nurses are awesome, is that I really feel that, we have a moral obligation and a moral duty to step up and to do absolutely what we can. And if that's just, for us, it would be like for social work, it would be the Canadian Association of Social Work Educators. And so our governing body then has a moral obligation and or duty to reply or to respond to that by way of statement. And I think that these shouldn't be responsive to infractions on our bodies, but they should also be, preventative as well, in terms of knowing that this sort of stuff is going to happen. So absolutely, we have a responsibility that I would like to see that, particularly for universities and the violences that we endure there as educators, but all of our colleagues, there should be workshops, decolonial workshops, or just even just basic Native 101 for us to come into relation with the nations in which we're practicing our crafts or our disciplines. So when these moments happen, when this happens, I need you to take to the streets. We need you. We really need to have everybody coming together. I mean, that's really what this presentation is about coming to understand our interconnectedness. So on February 16th, 2021, this is an email that I received. I'm reaching out to you to inquire as to if I might be aware of any Canadian Indigenous healthcare providers with training as a clinical ethicist. I'm coming to believe that the candidate would be the best candidate would be an Indigenous healthcare provider, a nurse, physician, etc., with formal training and experience in clinical experience working with Indigenous communities. Can you suggest anyone? This was sent to my colleagues at Ryerson, my Indigenous colleagues on our team. And so I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So first off, this idea of Canadian Indigenous. We're Indigenous people in Canada. I don't want to ever see a person refer to us as Canada's Indigenous people. We're not possessions, we're people. And then this next piece, I am coming to believe that the best candidate would be, I'm like, if you're already in this position, and I'm gonna show you what the position is in a second. If you're at this level working with or for Indigenous people, if you don't believe in us, why are you in that position? Why are you helping us? Why are you there to serve if you don't believe in our ability? With formal training. And so that formal training piece really points to, I'm like, well, formal training to me is also indicative of a person also having ancestral knowledges of our own healing methodologies and ways of knowing that go back since time immemorial. They're just as valid as the ones that are being practiced here now by the settler people. So this email was sent to me from the Patient Safety and Incident Primary Healthcare Systems of the First Nation Inuit Health Systems of Indigenous Services Canada. So I'm not including the person's name, but y'all can go and look at that for yourselves. But yeah, so that was an email that I received just last week. And this is on the hightails of the study that was just done that came out in November 20 by Mary Chappell-Lafond. So let's get into it. Health and wellness as a method of colonization. Well, a universal standard for healthcare is hetero-homo-Eurocentric and reproduces and maintains the ongoing Canadian cultural settler project of colonization and individualism. Western standardization does not take into account the diverse ways of knowing health and wellness and healing of the communities they propose or allege to help or give care to, and how intimately these interconnections are for every one of us now. Health and wellness as a method of colonization. Well, healthcare is a modernist Western creation. It has historically silenced Indigenous people in the name of helping, healing, patriarchy, infantilization, and evidence-based empirical research, etc. And as we know, on November 30th, 2020, Mary Ellen Chappell-Lafond released the findings of her addressing the anti-Indigenous racism in her review of the BC healthcare system. Excuse me. So I just put this infographic up just quickly, just as a point of reference. I hope everybody here has had a chance to take a look at this really important piece of literature that is out there for all of us. But I really appreciate the effort, and I appreciate this model. It's really great. I like how it keeps the circle, and that's, you know, a continual theme that will be going, the cyclical piece here. So colonialism and healthcare, and it goes through stereotypes, discrimination, and less access, and poor outcomes. I think that one of my, I'm just going to leave it alone, actually. Okay, so but let's focus on like the breaking the cycle piece here, because that's really what I'm here to do. Is that like throughout this whole document, you know, there is that point towards the import of doing a self-reflexive practice. And so I am going to be sharing a model towards the end of the presentation, and then we'll go through that. I'm just going to leave that for you to take into your own practices to either use with yourself. I find that it's really a strong foundational piece for the classrooms in which I'm teaching, and the students really respond to it. So I hope that we have that same sort of energy here today. So I'll just ask everyone with heart to really take the time to take a look through, because we really have to think about like stereotype bias and discrimination. Like, where do these things come from? We may not even know that we're perpetuating them or that we're participating in them. I know for myself that when I'm exhausted and tired, like I'll just say this, like with the, for instance, when if I'm tired, I'll slip and I will not use like pronouns, for instance. I forget to do that important work when I'm tired. And so I'm just using that example as, you know, just to have compassion for ourselves and just to know that we're all still learning and they're all just doing the best that we can. At the end of the day, we're all just walking each other home, right? So our interrelatedness, our values and ethics stem from our own worldviews. Our behaviors are based on our values and our ethics. And each one of us needs to understand our own values and beliefs and cultures. So who are we? Where are we from? And why are we here? You know, what nation? One of the things that I find with all of my students, my first generation students, my second generation students, or even my newcomer students, how quickly those connections to the places from which they came globally begin to disintegrate. When I ask my students, what are your teachings about water? Many of them don't know. You know, there's only a handful that actually bring that kind of knowledge forward. So it's about finding our confluence, our opportunities to be able to come together in a meaningful and in a good way. And so, yeah, our values and ethics are irrelevant unless they're brought to action. And that's really what I'm also making a call here for today. So Indigenous worldviews are rooted in our interdependence, our collective interests in spirituality and the environment, our relatedness to Mother Earth, our needs to cooperate to address life-threatening problems, an interest in finding different and sustainable ways of living with the Earth, and particularly our value for elders, as we can see with, you know, with COVID right now and how quickly we are, you know, these people literally are our libraries. You know, they're so important to us. So I also wanted to briefly, just touch on this one piece here of the medicine wheel, as I find that particularly within my field, that people like social work students are like, well, I'll just, you know, use the medicine wheel and, you know, contact an elder and do that sort of thing. But the medicine wheel isn't universal piece for which to be doing any sort of assessment or that sort of thing with Indigenous people. It's not something that is, it's not a blanket approach in terms of just how we've come to understand reconciliation isn't a blanket approach. So to give you an idea of how we engage differently with health, the 5 foundations to Secwepemc health are located through Tamil, which is the land. And so we say, if you look after her, she'll look after you. South Kwa, which is water. Water is medicine and medicine is water. We also believe that wind is one of our foundations. And we also believe that fire is one of our foundations. And when my grandma told me about this, taught me about this, I was so excited to learn about the blue light within. I thought that was actually really cool. I'm all like, oh my God, I'm a Jedi, I have the Force. So I think that piece really speaks really beautifully to, you know, the importance of our spiritual health as well. And that's one piece from my journey through this healthcare system at present hasn't been observed. When I'm put into a medical fast, you know, I wasn't out on the land fasting by myself. I had a sacred fire lit for myself, you know, and so my spiritual belief systems, like I believed that, you know, I had a visitation by something that I hadn't seen, something that really scared me from my childhood. And so, you know, I think that we really need to take into consideration a person's belief systems and hold them as just as valid. And provide people the opportunity to be able to look after themselves in the ways in which they need to. But I know that also, again, is really hard given the COVID times that we are in right now. All right, so Indigenous worldviews are holistic. There are many ways of knowing that are significant. Aboriginal helping is holistic, where the self is not extracted from the family and community, just as the self is not separate from the body, spirit, emotion. And then we have mental health issues are not seen as located within the person, but also reflected problems of the person's family, peer groups, and community at large. Treatment might include the use of ceremonies and spiritual practices, which can be balanced and integrated with Western approaches. And it's also important to note that changes are often marked with ceremony. Reciprocity in relationships within the Indigenous context. The relationship is based on us, not I and them. It's believed that everyone has a common humanity. And this is one thing that I wanted to also say, because I've had like a few care teams in my journey. But for me, in terms of like my understanding or my engagement with these people that are providing me care, there's been a few moments where, you know, I might be engaging and there's this really strict boundaries about like how we engaged with each other. And so I just want to say that for care teams, it can be a type of family, and family can include a wide range of people. And so we'll come to that in our self and relation model that we're going to come to quickly here. So connecting with service users, be present as a participant in the procedure or in the process to ensure that practices are more than just participatory, but that they're meaningful. Yeah, I had a CT scan like a month ago, and for me, that was it was more of a participatory experience. Everything was happening above me, and it wasn't happening with me, and it was really triggering, and I actually had to get up and leave from that moment. Yeah, for a meaningful way is just to engage. What would have made it meaningful for me is if someone had just like thought to maybe just put their hand on my shoulder, because it was pretty clear that I was having a response. That's just me. And we also have to understand that relationships take time, but we also understand that timelines also often limit this as well. Okay. So I'm just referencing the TRC's calls to action as an Indigenous, as a intergenerational survivor, survivor. And so I'm not going to go through the list, but I'm just popping these up here for a point of reference. So this is where we're going to get into the nursing pieces. And so I just went through the code of ethics for nursing, because I feel like there's like some strong, I believe like a lot of the work that I do is interdisciplinary. So I work with faculty of nursing, not only at Ryerson, but also at Thompson Rivers University. And those relationships are really important. I know that Cindy Blackstock also makes the call for like, you know, why are nursing students and social work students, when we're like attending her lectures, like why is everyone like in their own sections, why are we not more integrated? And I feel like that's really an important piece in terms of our learning. So I'm going to be pulling from these code of ethics. So ethical endeavors related to broad societal issues. And so these are the responsibilities that nurses have. Ethical nursing practice addresses broad aspects of social justice. These aspects are focused on improving the systems of societal structures to create greater equity for for service users. Individually and collectively, nurses keep abreast of current issues and concerns, and they're strong advocates for fair policies and practices. And so in terms of like thinking about this, I'm also asking for us to like maybe like look to replace nursing with just healthcare providers in this, in terms of our responsibilities to space and place. It's really important that we are doing that sort of self-reflexive practice to think about how are we contributing to the next generation coming up behind us. Nurses are moral agents providing care and whom create the moral communities that enable the provision of safe and compassionate and competent ethical care. I like this whole idea of moral communities here, but also being moral agents. It's like nurses are undercover. So nursing values and responsibilities, I just wanted to highlight these. So providing safe, compassionate, ethical care, promoting health and well-being, promoting and respecting informed decision-making, honoring dignity, maintaining privacy and confidentiality, promoting justice, and being accountable. I think that promoting justice is kind of where I'm coming at from this. So I need to, hold on a sec here. There we go. So ethical or moral courage. When nurses stand firm on a point of moral principle or a particular decision about something in the face of overwhelming fear or threat to self. nurses respect the special history and interest of Indigenous people as articulated in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And so I just wanted to also highlight this one piece as well, is that I don't want, for myself as an Indigenous person, I'm just going to speak for myself. I don't want any profession to just respect my special history. I want people to actually take action on that. And that's what I'm calling for here, is for us to find just small ways or big ways in which we can begin to, address these calls to action, because these are directly implicated in these calls to action are implicated in our health, right? So as our Indigenous health. So supporting environmental preservation and restoration while advocating for initiatives that reduce environmentally harmful practices in order to promote health and well-being. So both in health, both for nursing and for social work, we have these calls for engaging in environmental preservation. But again, the deafening silence that happens when I'm on the front lines or when I'm doing these kinds of works. And at the same time, also nurses I recognize are incredibly overworked at this time with COVID, but just to find the ways in which we can be contributing to the protection of the very systems that keep us alive. Ethical or moral residue. And so I'm providing this model today because I want to liberate ourselves from, from feeling bad or any of those sorts of things. So what each of I like this inclusion in the description of the ethical code. So moral is, the ethical residue is what each of us carries with us from times in our lives when in the face of morally distressing situations, we have been seriously compromised. And that these instances leave lasting and powerful impressions in our thoughts that persist over time, hence the term moral residue. So let's avoid moral residue and let's address this plaque. So how are we going to do that? Well, I am mine before I'm anyone else's. And so I really want us to really center ourselves and to be thinking in a good way about our practices. So I wanted to introduce the self and relation model to you. And this is our opportunity to recognize our interconnectedness. It is to know ourselves in the vast circle in which all expressions of life, the birds, the animals, the trees, the insects, the rocks, our brothers and our sisters, they're our kin. We are all equally beloved and they're all vital to our Mother Earth. And this comes from Medicine Eagle and one of my favorite books by Jean-Pierre Graveline from 1998. We are like one big family with all our relations. Nothing we do by ourselves, and together we form a circle. So here we are. So this model is an Indigenous model. It's a Cree model of human relations, which is both multi-generational, transdirectional, and transtemporal, and reveals the following key components as related to the construct of identity. So it's discovering the self. Oops, sorry. Here it is. So it's a simple model, really. It's just a spiral model. But as we start to move out through all of these rings here, what we begin to see is how we impact all of these different areas. And so what I like about this model is that, we can think about environmental theory and that sort of thing. And so, each one has its own distinct ring, like a ring of a tree. Whereas I like this spiral because as we move out, we begin to see how we impact all of those things. And in the reverse, we see how all of these larger structures impact ourselves. And so what I'm going to get people to do right now, I'm just going to quickly, all right, we are cruising cookies. Okay. So for this last 10 minutes or so, what I would like for us to do is to grab a piece of paper, or in a separate window, maybe just what we're going to do is draw this model, or at least maybe create 5 little subheadings. So you'll have self, family, community, agency, and the world. And so for the self, what I ask my students to do with this model is I really want people to think about all of the really good things that you bring to the table. What are your tools? What's in your toolbox? I want people to think about, you know, what gives you a sense of pride, a sense of power, makes you feel good about yourself, those sorts of things. So I think about, for myself, I think about my ancestry. So I think about like my spirit guides, and I think about the names that I carry. And earlier I said, Waitep, Simrao and Squest. Simrao means mountain cat. And so this is the name that I carry. This is something that I look after. For myself, I tend to nest. So I have like, I'm really into like rocks and crystals, and I don't have like a lot of them, but I have like, you know, just ones that I feel I have a connection to. I have plants. I have, plants are really important to me. What else do I have? For me, I feel like my clothing is my armor. So me doing my own personal style, those sorts of things. So just really thinking about all those good things. In terms, earlier you heard in my description that I'm a decolonial methodologist. So that would be one thing that I would write down for myself. And it's a lot easier for us to be self-deprecating than it is for us to actually, you know, celebrate ourselves for who we are and the work that we do and what we bring to the table. So what sort of theories or what sort of practice approaches do we bring to the table in terms of this? So I'll give you just a couple more seconds to think that through. And so why don't we just have this be like a working document? So maybe just jot down a few things for yourself. Like also think about who your ancestors are. That's why I referenced my father, you know, and my dad, I believe, walks with me still. So just, you know, if you have any passing, any people passing, think about those people, and, you know, think about the good things that they've taught you or shared with you in this life, and jot that down for yourself and look after yourself and your grief in that good way. So family, I think that we can all, probably those of us that are that have pets or animal companions, can agree that that they're our family. My little cat Marilyn, she's a Lynx Point Siamese, definitely is my family. So how we come to understand, particularly if we're coming at this from like an LGBTQ lens, is that we have these our found families, which are really important to our identity formation, to our health, to our safety and wellness. Yeah, so however you define family, whether that's an important piece for you, you know, obviously we all know that we have family members that we don't particularly would care to have in our model. So we'll just choose who they are. And let's move out to community. So when we're thinking about community, what sort of communities are you involved in? Are we in a health, like what sort of like, would you consider like your place of work a type of community that you're in? Or would you, the unit that you serve on, or your practice, would you consider that a community, a healing community or a health community? Or would you consider the sports team that you're a part of your community? Or do you have online communities? Or do you play Dungeons and Dragons? I don't know, but however you decide to identify community, jot that down for yourself. I would think about community for myself too, is also then extending from family into community. I would also, there'd be like this osmosis that would happen, that would be my relationships to water, my relationships to trees in particular, my relationships to the flora and the fauna of my territory, of those sorts of things. You know, for me on my healing journey, arriving in Vancouver, finally, you know, it was the one place that felt right. My family moved me home last March to Kamloops to address my my cancer diagnosis, and unfortunately that didn't work out. So I had to continue on my journey, and I moved to Vancouver Island and stayed with some friends there for a little while. And unfortunately, after a couple months, that wasn't really working out either. And well, some of you are probably like, but you have cancer. I had my tumor removed in May of last year. And so it's just been trying to find like the right place to feel safe for me. And arriving in Vancouver, I have relationships with the seawall. I have relationships with Stanley Park, and so having these two things that were more easily accessible for me than living on my reserve, where I had to get a ride to get anywhere, or staying on the island with a friend where I had to ask my friend for a ride, like those sorts of things. For me, accessibility is really a big piece for me for my own health and wellness, and my ability to heal. So coming to Vancouver was a really big piece for me in my engagement with the lands and the waters, and the nations and the people that I know here. So let's move to agency. So for agency, what I get my students to do is I have them think about all of the different social work agencies that they're connected to. And so I would ask that for the same sort of approach from for healthcare. So what sort of healing communities are you a part of, or what hospitals do you have relationships with, or what doctors do you have relationships with, and just to think about what another avenue of our health. There's a call from Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafon's report that also is asking for another to look at the interconnectedness or the intersections of how health and wellness, or our Indigenous health, is intersects with education, and where it intersects with all of these other sort of these big systems, right? But as we know, as what I'm calling for is that self-reflexive piece of how are these structures, how's social work, how's nursing, how's education, how is law, participated in the makings of the nation state, and so how are we complicit in that? So thinking about these agencies, what I get my students to do then is to pinpoint where are the gaps, where can I make better connectivity or better relations with. And so for me, one of the pieces was I didn't have strong relationships in terms of my resistance communities that I participated in with Black Lives Matters back when all that was happening a couple of years ago. So I reached out and built those relationships. And so, yeah, so just getting people to think about then, how many of you out there that are watching right now can identify any of the Indigenous health professionals and or communities that you have active relationships with, and how are you in service? And then, so then let's get people to think about what connections do we have out into the world. And so I guess for me, immediately what I think about is from the institutional level of the universities. So what universities are you connected to globally, and what other learning communities are you a part of, and yada, yada, yada. So that's how the model works. And so when we're thinking about this, as we're moving out, we begin to see how, all of these good things that we're carrying in our hearts and in our practices, that we carry into our family, that we carry into our communities, and that we carry into the sites of practice that we participate in. And then hopefully that we also too are stepping up and helping the world to transform, because that's really what I believe that this is what this time is about, is this point of transformation. There is a prophecy that it said that when there's a prevalence of two-spirit people in this life, that that marks the coming changes that are coming. And so I extend that to think about, that ancestral visioning or telling of the future, that also is then inclusive of, you know, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters that exist here in this time with us now, and that we have a responsibility to help people walk through this time of change. So I hope that this model is helpful to you in terms of just thinking about how are you heartfully engaging in the self-reflexive practice? How are you able to step into that moment of self-care and to think about the ways in which we engage not only with just Indigenous people, but with all people? Because the report also identified that there was reports coming in from other racialized communities in British Columbia that also too are experiencing a disproportionate amount of racism. Just call it what it is, of racism. And I don't think that that's cool. So we need to be doing better to look after each other, and we also need to look after ourselves too, because I also recognize that, you know, burnout is a really big piece for all of us. I only lasted writing Glitty reports for 8 months, so anyhow, my last slide here. May the forest be with you. I freaking love Star Wars, so I really hope that everybody's been watching The Mandalorian. In terms of thinking about like how can we address you know, reconciliation, or how can we address decolonizing practices, like as the TRC, or as the inquiry, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Trans, and Two-Spirit inquiry called for. So I'm just popping up this infographic here. This is one of the things that our land defenders called for in terms of thinking about the harms of man camps. And so one group of my students, when I was still working at TRU, at Thompson Rivers University, has put together this awesome infographic that was shared on social media and was put to really good use. There's more to that story, but another example of what students have done is that they've also participated in doing a solidarity march in Kamloops, doing for the February 14th Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's March. So, you know, they put together that. What else have they done? Yeah, there's a bunch of different, but there's many different ideas of things that we can do in order to address or to be in solidarity or to look after these systems. Right now we have these beautiful, you know, settler women that have joined in our land and water defense, that have, you know, gone the length of, like, you know, putting, they've been arrested. You know, I think that that's really commendable, and not that I'm asking for people to go and get arrested or get involved in land and water defense in the ways in those, but, you know, there's ways of writing letters, or for your healing communities to write letters, or your practice communities, or your learning communities, or your families to be doing these things. But we need to start looking after each other better. And so perhaps part of that solution is just our own self-care and our own self-reflexive practice of checking in and really finding what it is that we need for ourselves in our practice, and how we need to be looked after. So I'm just going to stop there for now, because I think that we only have a little bit more time for, yeah. I rambled there for that last little bit. But yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you all today.
Hi, Jeffrey, it's Nikki. I'm trying to put my video back on. Give me a sec here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this amazing presentation. We've got time for a few questions now. I'm just going to have a look at the chat and see. We've got a lot of thank yous. Somebody wants to know what your favorite indoor plant is. That's a random question, but nice. But yeah, so I just thinking about this model that you've gone through, the model that you, the spiral model. Can you give us an example of how to apply in our day-to-day life, how we would use this model?
Like in terms of just like for ourselves or like in practice?
In practice, I think.
Practice? Well, the ways in which I've thought about like engaging with this model is just simply like with our intake process. Um,
Right.
and I know that this can be really disconcerting or off-putting, especially if we were working with a person that's come in through the, oh, here comes Marilyn. Come here.
Oh, here she comes.
There's
There she is.
that fluffy little murder mittens. Anyways, so to come to think about like engaging with this model, I know that when I have engaged it, it has been triggering for my students that have come through the child welfare system. So, but in terms of being able to expand or to help create a type of genealogy even, so working with an Indigenous person or not an Indigenous person, but just working with it in the ways in which I've asked people to think about how you're using it for yourself. So just drafting up like doing those empowerment pieces and being able to think about how are we um, being able to reveal to a client, like, well, look at all these awesome things that you have here about yourself, and you just helping to flesh out all of these different strands for people that we're in service to.
That's lovely. Avanti's got a question too. Wants to know if you can provide some takeaway, tangible tools that can hold us more accountable as healthcare providers.
I think that what would help with the tangible tools is actually just thinking about the ways in which what would be meaningful for I can only personalize it for every Indigenous person, but for me, what would be really meaningful would be for me to be able to look on a hospital website or to walk into a hospital and see the ways in which the hospital is actively addressing the calls to action. Or for, one of my shout out to Dr. Burns at St. Paul's. But, when I did my initial intake with him over the phone, he asked me like, oh, have you read this book, Unsettling Canada? And I'm like, oh, that's my relative. So, like that sort of stuff, like being able to just actively engage with Indigenous persons through like just meaningful ways of like, oh, I'm reading this book, just simple stuff like that, or just being able to talk about stuff that's happening locally in the nation or the territory. That's a way to keep us accountable and to make sure that we're participating, I guess, like in the day to day. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really seems so common sense, but so amazing too. We've got another question here on, and this is kind of a big picture question. How can the Western healthcare system address its maintenance of colonialism?
Sorry, I did not mean to laugh out loud, but I just feel like, can we like have, I don't know, I think we need to start writing a SHRC application for a connections grant, and then we can talk about it in a conference. I think like, yeah, that's a really big question to answer. And I don't think that just one person can answer that. I think that that's all of us coming together to have that conversation, to really actively confront compassionately, hold close to heart our unknowing, and just to recognize that all ways of knowing are valid. I think that if we, I think about our ways forward together, and I think about the hybridity theory, and I think about my ancestors who were really amazing at grafting trees together and splicing trees. Like we have culturally modified trees in my territory that point to near perfect northwest, east, and south, and that amazes me. We have medicine trees where there's cedar and like juniper trees that are grafted together, and so when I think about that as a metaphor, these beautiful medicines that we all carry and that we are, finding those moments of confluence or ways in which we can come together. That, yeah, there's some things that don't work within Western thought. But there's also some things from within Indigenous ways of thinking. Like I have a huge problem with this idea of the red road and how exclusionary it can be for people that are, you know, walking through addiction. It's not for us to ever judge a person for what kind of medicine they're using just to stay here right now, right? And so that's where I feel like that there's the exclusionary piece from within our own Indigenous circles and communities when we're talking about, like, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think about hybridity. I think about symbiosis as well, and that's another theory that I'm just kind of like exploring right now. I'm thinking about, like, how are we looking to creating the new? Like, yeah, we can look and we can go back and we can feel bad about everything that's arrived us to this moment, but I think about, like, yeah, like we can identify those things, but how are we going to manifest something that's never been seen before and something that's brand new, in terms of a society that is inclusive and equitable for everyone, that includes Indigenous people and our sovereignty.
Wow. There's so much that you've given me to think about today. It's just, I can see in the chat too. I mean, we're just past 11 now, and we've got all these like amazing, really long last minute questions. I don't think it's kind of like when you're on your way out the door at the doctor's office and you're like, oh, by the way, and then, or the therapist's office, you drop that big kind of question. So I don't think we're going to have time to answer the remainder of the questions today, but we do have our chat feature, and we will forward them to Jeffrey to answer that way. We'll have everyone's emails. Yeah, I want to thank you so much today, Jeffrey, for your time and your teachings and all of the amazing, thought-provoking knowledge that you've shared. This has just been, I was working through my exercise, and, you know, even just in those few minutes, you've really inspired me. I also want to thank Seraphine and Jillian, our interpreters today. Yeah, any final things you want to say, Jeffrey, before you leave us?
Yeah, thanks to the interpreters as well. Thank you for being here. And also for you, Nikki, thank you for inviting me to have this opportunity to speak. It really helps me along my healing journey to feel like I have something to contribute to, where I'm told to just rest and relax. And I'm all like, I can't just rest and relax. I need to do something.
You need to do it.
So thank you for just providing me this opportunity to share.
Oh, we're so grateful. I want to hold up my hands in gratitude for your teachings today. And on behalf of our Aboriginal Health team and our Indigenous Cultural Safety team in particular, I want to say thank you once again. Yeah, all right, everybody. I think we're going to end it there. Take care, and we'll see you next time. If you want to register, we will send out an email afterwards to all the participants with a link to register for our next session on Eventbrite and some resources. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.